The first thing that bothered me about the photograph wasn't the parents, it was the baby. That probably sounds strange because on the surface the picture looked almost painfully ordinary. A well-dressed couple in a nice room, posed the way families used to pose when a camera felt like an event instead of a habit. The father standing straight in a tailored suit. The mother seated with one hand resting lightly against a lace blanket. And between them, this little infant in a christening gown, maybe 5 months old, maybe 6. It should have read as comfort, wealth, pride, a family preserving one polished moment for the future. But the baby didn't look peaceful. He looked tired, not sleepy, not fussy. Tired in a way that made no sense on a face that young. And his eyes, this is the part that stayed with me. They weren't drifting toward the camera or toward his mother. They were fixed off to the side, almost like he was tracking someone just outside the frame, someone didn't trust. That was the moment the whole thing stopped being just an old picture. It started with an estate sale in Cleveland in the fall of 2025. I'd gone because that's what I do. Old houses, old collections, old objects with half their stories missing. Usually I'm looking for silver, watches, early advertising, maybe some paper ephemera, if the condition is good. I know how this sounds, but after enough years, you develop a feel for what's junk, what's valuable, and what has that odd little current running through it where your instincts say, hold on, don't walk past this yet. The house belonged to the Ashcroft family. Big brick place, built sometime around 1908, full of heavy wood furniture and the sort of moneyed clutter families accumulate when no one's thrown anything away in 3 generations. Most of the people at the sale were doing what people always do. Opening drawers too fast, flipping through china, treating somebody else's life like a yard sale, with better wallpaper. I found the photograph in what had been the library. It was sitting in a tarnished silver frame on a side table, not hidden, not highlighted either. Just there. The cardstock and the style told me right away it was probably early 1920s. The room in the photo looked formal but lived in with patterned drapes, a carved sideboard, and enough detail to suggest the family wanted the setting included on purpose. This wasn't some studio backdrop. This was their actual home. I picked it up, and right away that baby's face got me. I bought it for $30. Honestly, that's the part people always think means I knew something right then. I didn't. Not really. I just knew the photo bothered me, and in my line of work that's usually enough reason to spend a little money and take an object home. Sometimes the mystery turns out to be nothing. Sometimes you find a note, a date, a studio mark, and the whole thing settles down into ordinary history. This one didn't settle. Back at my shop, I opened the frame carefully and checked the back of the print. That's where old photographs usually start talking. Stamps, handwriting, dates, names. And this one had all of it. Embossed into the mount was the name Adler Portrait Atelier, Cleveland, Ohio. In dark ink across the back, someone had written April 18th, 1923. Gerald, Eleanor, and baby Peter Hawthorne. Now I had names. That changes everything. Within an hour, I'd found Gerald Hawthorne in old business listings. He wasn't just comfortable, he was rich. Finance, insurance, investment syndicates, the kind of polished 1920s money that looked respectable in newspapers and probably looked worse up close. Eleanor came from a family with old manufacturing money out of Akron. Society pages loved them. Fundraisers, dinners, charity committees, concerts, all that lacquered upper-class nonsense that reads beautifully in print and tells you almost nothing real. Then I found Peter. He died in May of 1923, less than a month after the photograph was taken. Cause of death, according to the notice, was listed vaguely as infant weakness following a sudden decline. No details, no scandal. Just one small column tucked between an ad for summer hats and a report on rail investments. That's when the baby's expression changed for me. Before, it was unsettling. After that, it felt like a warning. I took the photograph to a historian I know named Claire Donovan. She teaches visual culture and early photography, and she's one of those people who can look at a century-old print and tell you more from the lighting than most families know from their own oral history. I trust her because she's careful. She doesn't jump to ghosts or miracles or dramatic conclusions. She starts with lenses, exposure, body language, composition, the boring stuff that usually turns out not to be boring at all. Claire put the photo under magnification and got quiet almost immediately. "The technical work is excellent," she said. "Look at the gown, the mother sleeve, the texture in the upholstery. Whoever took this knew exactly what he was doing." Then she focused on the baby. "What?" I asked. She adjusted the light. "He's not looking randomly. He's tracking something or someone." I leaned in. The longer I looked, the clearer it became. The baby wasn't looking at the mother. He wasn't reacting to the camera. His gaze was directed toward the left side of the room, just off the visible edge. Claire kept studying the shadows. "There's another thing. See the light pattern here? There's a hard reflection from that same side, stronger than the rest of the setup. Something or someone was positioned there, close enough to catch the baby's attention. So what are you saying?" "I'm saying babies this young don't pose psychologically. They react, and this child is reacting to something he doesn't like." That sentence sat with me. He doesn't like. Simple words. But suddenly the whole photograph felt less like a family portrait and more like a tiny crime scene that had been framed in silver and left on a table for 100 years. The deeper research made it worse. Gerald Hawthorne had been linked quietly to 2 ugly financial collapses in 1922 and 1923. Never charged, never publicly ruined, just whispered about in the business pages the way powerful men often are when everyone knows something stinks, but nobody can quite force the door open. Eleanor, meanwhile, had vanished from social columns for stretches that year, then reappeared looking rested or recovered, which in those days could mean anything from exhaustion to grief to a breakdown nobody wanted named. Then I found another child, a daughter, Lillian Hawthorne, born in 1921. Dead before age 1. Different wording on the records, same pattern, sudden decline, frail health, no investigation, 2 infants dead in, the same household within 2 years. That's not impossible, obviously. Tragedy stacks up in families all the time, but it's the kind of pattern that stops feeling random once you say it out loud. Around then, I tracked down the house in the photograph. Still standing. Converted long ago into upscale apartments, but the bones of it were intact. Same windows, same carved trim, same proportions. A pediatric specialist named Dr. Nina Mercer owned the unit now, and when I contacted her, she surprised me by saying she already knew the Hawthorne story, at least the polite version of it. She let me visit. Standing in that room with the photograph in my hand was one of those moments where history stops feeling abstract. The angle of the windows matched. The fireplace mantel matched. Even the corner where the baby had been looking toward, that matched too. It was now just a section of restored wall beside a built-in cabinet. Nina watched me compare the picture to the room and then said, very casually, "You're not the first person to think something was wrong in that family." I turned and looked at her. She went to a drawer and brought back a folder. Inside were things the previous owner had left boxed up in the basement decades ago. Household receipts, 2 letters, a pediatric pamphlet, and 1 handwritten note in a woman's hand, shaky and uneven, dated 3 days after Peter's death. It was from Eleanor to her sister. I still remember the feeling of reading it. Not because the prose was beautiful, it wasn't. It was scared, messy, immediate, the kind of writing people do when they're trying not to lose their nerve. She wrote that she could not stay in the house. She wrote that Peter was gone just as Lillian was gone. She wrote that the doctors used words that explained nothing, and then came the line that changed the whole case for me. I cannot prove what I fear, but I have watched Gerald with the children when he thinks no one sees him. That's not proof, obviously. It's suspicion, a mother's suspicion. But in old stories like this, suspicion is often the first honest thing anybody managed to preserve. There was more. Nina took me into what used to be the nursery, now her home office. During renovation, she'd preserved 1 patch of original wallpaper behind glass because she liked the pattern. Pale florals, tiny vines, soft blue stems. Pretty, harmless, until she pointed out the marks. Small handprints, not clean ones, not decorative ones. Little smudges, low on the wall near where a crib would have sat. And below them, near the trim, darker stains that had once seeped through and been papered over. Nina had actually had the residue tested years ago out of professional curiosity. Traces consistent with opiate compounds. My stomach dropped. Laudanum. Back then it was everywhere. Easy to get. Used for pain, sleep, nerves, colic, coughs. A miracle bottle until it wasn't. In adults it was dangerous. In infants, it could be catastrophic. That was the first moment I let myself think the thing I'd been resisting. Not tragedy, murder. Still, I needed more than atmosphere and one frightened letter. That sent me looking for the photographer's archives. Adler Portrait Atelier had shut down long ago, but a local college had inherited parts of the business records. Sitting in that archive room, turning pages no one had cared about for generations, I found the session ledger for April 18th, 1923. The Hawthorne entry was there. Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Hawthorne with infant son for domestic family portrait. Then the technical notes. East window light, reflector from left. Mother anxious, infant unsettled, father impatient, child distressed whenever father entered close range. I had to read that last line twice. Child distressed whenever father entered close range. Even the photographer noticed. And below that, in smaller handwriting, one final note. Mrs. H. requested separate prints, excluding certain arrangements, asked that all observations from session be retained privately. That stopped me cold. Eleanor knew. Or at least she feared enough to create a record. A week later, another piece turned up through a family contact. A retired psychiatrist in Oregon named Margaret Hale reached out after hearing that I was researching the Hawthornes. Eleanor was her great-grandmother's sister. Family papers had passed down sideways through women who apparently understood that some truths survive only if you keep mailing them to people who won't burn them. Margaret flew out with copies of Eleanor's diary. That diary was the real twist. Not because it made the story louder, but because it made it human. She wrote about Gerald's temper, about money pressures, about insurance policies, about Lillian's death, and the way Gerald had treated it like a scheduling problem instead of a catastrophe. She wrote about finding a brown medicine bottle in his private cabinet. She wrote that Peter became strangely drowsy after Gerald insisted on helping. And on the day of the photograph, she wrote this: I wanted Peter pictured while he was still with me. I hate myself for writing that, but it is true. I do not trust the peace in this house. During the sitting, Peter watched Gerald with those wide, frightened eyes, and the photographer saw it too. I know he saw it. There it was. The payoff, if you want to call it that, though honestly, it felt more like heartbreak than payoff. The baby in the photo wasn't eerie because viewers were projecting backward onto him after learning he died. He looked afraid because, in all likelihood, he was afraid. The camera had caught something nobody around that child was willing or able to stop in time. The rest came together in ugly, familiar pieces. Gerald left Cleveland within a few years, remarried, married, money again. 2 stepchildren in that second household also died young under vague diagnoses. He was never charged with anything. He outlived everybody who could have accused him effectively, on paper. He remained what men like him so often remain, respectable. That's the part that really gets under my skin. Not just that evil happened. Evil always happens. It's that it happened inside polished rooms, inside expensive suits, inside a face the newspapers probably described as distinguished. A man could poison children and still get invited to dinner because the performance of respectability was stronger than a woman's fear. Eleanor eventually got away. That much the later records show. She never remarried. She spent years doing quiet volunteer work with women and children in crisis. She kept Peter's portrait until she died. And in her final letter, which Margaret brought with her, she wrote something that I still think about more than I'd like. She wrote, My son could not speak, but he was not silent. That's it. That's the whole reason this photograph matters. Not because it's supernatural, not because the baby predicted his death, not because cameras captures ghosts or fate or any of that. It matters because the truth was visible the whole time. A child recoiling, a mother straining to keep control of the room, a father impatient to get it over with, a photographer observant enough to write down what he saw, a woman frightened enough to hide copies, letters, notes, anything that might outlive him. All these tiny acts of preservation, all these people leaving crumbs for the future because the present would not protect them. That photograph hangs differently for me now. When I first picked it up, I thought I was buying a good 1920s portrait with odd emotional energy. Something collectible. Something maybe a little haunting. What I actually bought was evidence. Not legal evidence. That chance was gone a long time ago, but moral evidence, historical evidence, human evidence, proof that a baby's face can tell the truth long before adults are ready to hear it. And the part that still chills me is this. How many other photographs are out there doing the same thing? How many family portraits have been sitting quietly in frames looking ordinary, while one expression, one hand placement, one glance off camera has been trying for decades to tell us what really happened in the room. Because once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, and the next time you come across an old photograph that feels just a little wrong, you may want to trust that feeling. Sometimes history whispers. Sometimes it stares straight out of the frame, and sometimes, if you're willing to look long enough, the smallest face in the picture is the one that tells you everything.